A warm welcome to all of you on this very frosty winter's day amidst the New Year's Eve celebrations, and it's absolutely wonderful to be in conversation with you all. On behalf of UK Asian Film Festival, and a special thanks to BFI for the Japan program, and of course Z5 for providing the screening of Love in Tokyo. I think Suman, I think I'd like to come to you first, actually, if you would like to share a few words about the Japan program at BFI, and perhaps why Love in Tokyo was the apt film for us to discuss today.
Okay, thank you very much to Filmwallahs for allowing me to kind of host this or co-partner this with yourselves. So this year, the BFI was doing a season of films called BFI Japan to celebrate 100 years of Japanese cinema. It was to coincide with the Tokyo Olympics, but it kind of happened a bit later than that. So I programmed and curated a few films with a sister partner organization called Physical, which was trying to look at the influences and the connections between Japanese cinema and Indian cinema. And we showed, a couple of Kurosawa films, like, for example, The Seven Samurai, which was then inspired Sholay, and an earlier film called Stray Dog, which inspired a kind of a South Indian film. And we also showed a couple of Indian films, which had Japanese, like The Japanese Wife, obviously, Aparna Sen, and an Indian filmmaker who lives in Japan and makes films in Japan. And as part of that, I had wanted to be able to screen Love in Tokyo on the big screen, but it's really hard to figure out who actually owns the rights of it for the big screen. That did not work. But luckily, it was available as on Z5, because I wanted to look at, it's like, it seems to be one of those earlier international films that the Indian filmmakers started making, made in the 60s. And I wanted to look at whether it inspired this trend of the Japanese sari, the fashion in India. But I mean, I'm not sure about that. And I was hoping that, that's the kind of conversation we might have had. I was also trying to get Asha Parekh, and I did manage to speak to her a couple of times, but hopefully in real life, she may come. I mean, I did not succeed in getting her for this year, as it were. So really, that's the kind of overall thinking behind this event.
Wow, well, that's wonderful, Suman, and I think I'm really glad, and hopefully, fingers crossed, Ashaji makes it in person as well. I think, Pushpinder, right, if you'd like to also share a few words maybe about Filmwallah as well. I think we have a few new faces today as well joining us.
I'm really happy to join hands with you, Suman, on this film. This has been slotted in during holiday period, so we are happy to discuss it. But our Filmwallahs is a group that came out of COVID, and we wanted to keep the watching and discussion on film alive with our audience. So this is also a part of our audience development strategy, and we've been working at it consistently over 1.5 years, and eventually we have been able to get BFI to give this group a home to watch films on big screen. So from March 2022, we will be screening in person every bi-monthly. So the other month we'll have a screening at 5 with a big film. So our first one is going to be one of our festival closing night film. It was Beatles and India. If you haven't seen this film, do come and see it. It's excellent. But more importantly, we will have after party with the filmmakers upstairs in the Blue Room with singing and inspired singing from Beatles' original songs. So we are still working out the details. So as I said, this Filmwala is part of our audience development, and watching films together is the idea. Yeah. So thank you, Anuj, for holding the fort for us for Filmwalas. We had some really interesting discussions, and I'm looking forward to hearing about this film from people. I love the songs and I love the acting. And it was a real advert for going to Japan. It's beautiful. And to think that in 1966, how advanced it was. That was amazing. The kind of backdrop that comes with the film is amazing. Thank you. So back to you, Anuj.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's really interesting as well. And it's come at a timely, relevant time, rather, because I think we had a film called Drive My Car, I think, which has also gone to the Oscars from Japan, if I'm not wrong. I mean, it was on the submissions. I'm not sure if it's been nominated, but it definitely was in the list of submissions too, which is quite wonderful. And we're having this discussion. So I think my first question will be the clincher of what we want to get out of today's discussion. And I think, Suman, I'm going to pose this to you first, actually. I think about the Indian and Japanese cultural exchange represented through the film. What was your opinion on that? What did you think about the way it was all amalgamated together?
Well, for this film, I mean, I really enjoyed it as a kind of 60s romance, and I'm familiar with the songs, having heard them a lot. But I think that, yeah, I agree with Pushpinder that it seems like an advert for Japan, because the Tokyo was just a backdrop to the story of this Indian community. And I did find some things funny, which is so typical in Bollywood, Hindi films, that, the Indian culture, that the little kid says something about, very interesting question. Like when the uncle sees the kid the first time, he says to him that, that I am Indian, and it would be like some might disrespect if I can't take you to India, or something that, words to that effect. And the kid says, well, actually, I am Japanese and I'm born here, so I need to stay in Japan. I thought that was very interesting. And then it says that, oh, but your dad was Indian. It's not really explored in that way, because it's a kind of a comedy romance. So I found that was quite deep, but otherwise it is on the level of, let's say, stereotype or archetypes of Japan, the geisha girl, the aunt who's pretending to be Japanese, but it was fun. What can I say, in that sense? But one thing I have not been able to find out, which I am curious about, is what made them decide that they were going to go to Japan, and like, why Japan? Why not, I don't know, Berlin or whatever.
Interesting.
Anyway, by the way, as an aside, I wanted to say that I had also invited Courage, who's in the corner of the window. Courage is a friend and a academic, and I was hoping that I could have persuaded him to also do something on the India-Japan thing, but in the future, who knows?
Oh, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for that, Suman. Well, on that note, Courage, a warm welcome to you on our Filmwala Club. In fact, since Suman, you've mentioned Courage, I'd love to ask Courage his opinion actually on the Japanese and Indian cultural exchange that took place with this film. What did you make of it, especially for the time that it was set at as well?
Hi, hello to you all. I think I've seen quite a lot of people here at events and stuff, but I think someone's the only person who I know. So thank you for the introduction, and no pressure or anything. I think it's really interesting. I mean, this is a film that's been on my kind of like to watch this for quite a long time, partly because the research that I'm doing at the moment looks at London in Indian cinema. And this is that kind of period where we have like Sangam, Evening in Paris, Night in London, that whole little run of like Hindi films that have like foreign locations. And obviously this is one of the big super kind of like successful ones out of that. I think one of the things that does just I guess specifically in terms of the question you asked about the Japanese Indian kind of connection, I think what I find so fascinating is the way that in a lot of those other films from that kind of period, modernity is associated with like the West and Europe and the US. And here it's a bit kind of like different. It's a bit kind of ambivalent, because here modernity is kind of associated with another an even more Eastern kind of like culture and kind of space. So I think it's really quite unique and quite sort of like different from the usual modernity, West, tradition, Indianness, Easternness, the binary that you see, you know, right through to the more kind of recent NRI films. You know, so I think there's something in that I think is really unusual and kind of like fascinating, the idea that you could have an Eastern space that is also a space of modernity. And I wonder if there's an element of aspiration and kind of like projection there as well. Is this also Indian cinema's way of saying that actually, you know, we don't need to become like Paris or kind of London or you know, the US, that actually there's maybe a way of reconciling tradition and modernity in a way that is Indian and kind of Eastern, that isn't just imitating Western models of kind of modernity. So I think it's really interesting and very unusual compared to the other films from this kind of like period.
Yeah, well, very well said there. Thank you so much for that. Himanshi, actually, what would you like to say about the sort of cultural exchange that we've seen? Maybe even as through the perspective as an actor yourself. I think it would be wonderful to hear your opinion.
Thanks, Anuj. My perspective, that I was watching the film just as an actor, honestly, seeing what kind of lighting they were doing at that time, who was actually the star of the film, why they chose Japan. And coming to that, I feel, and I could be completely off, but this is how lots of Indian films back in the day were started. They probably had a song that was based around Japan, and then they based a story around it. It didn't have to be Japan at all. It probably, Love in Tokyo is probably like a song that the music director came up with, and then they created a complete story around it, which made sense at that point. It's just like me thinking out of the box, but it's there's so many stories that have been built off of songs, because music was so essential for all of the films from that time, especially. I was completely blown away by how simple the story was. In my head, I thought it was going to be a big story before I got into watching it, and then it was such a simple, sweet narrative. And the kid, I forget his name, the actor's name. He was brilliant. So my perspective in that way, I mean, I wasn't looking at it in any other way, but wow, they created this in 1966. Wow, this actor did this, because I knew one of the, Murad Saab is actually a friend's grandfather. So I kept looking at him like, wow, they look so similar. And I was looking at even Pran Saab and how uncomfortable he was with his cigarette, because I know he never smoked really. And all of those small things, like I wasn't really getting into it in that way. I think maybe a second watch, and then I'll probably go look at it with a broader perspective.
Wow, that's wonderful. And I think I'm going to use that as a way to segue into my next question. I think the main attraction for any Pramod Chakraborty film is the lead casting. I think be it Shami Kapoor and Babita's chemistry in Tumse Acha Kaun Hai, or Dharmendra and Hema Malini in Jugnu as well, for that matter. There's always that spark between the two lead actors. But I think it's really interesting because Joy Mukherjee and Asha Parekh, I mean, I could be wrong, but I mean, they weren't exactly like, they're quite underrated as a pairing. I feel like they weren't exactly like your prominent couples that we used to see back in the day. So I wanted to just get your opinions on what you all felt about the lead actors coming together and the chemistry that they both shared. Bobby, I think we'll come to you for this actually.
Okay, thank you, Anuj. Yeah, so you know, my perspective generally on Hindi movies and Bollywood is from a musical point of view, and then I base everything around that. And I think once again, this film is, before I come to your point, this film is, in my opinion, is more, applauded for its music and its wonderful songs. Songs like, which I consider to be one of Rafi Saab's probably the best songs. O mere shahe guba, o meri jane janana, tum mere paas hoti ho, koi dusra nahi hota. With fantastic lyrics by Hasrat Jaipuri, who was, an institution at the time and will remain as long as Hindi music remains. And then Shailendra, Shankar Jaikishan, so my perspective when I first watched this movie, and I watched it at least 100 times since the last 40 odd years, I can tell you, was picking up the songs and then basing everything else around it. So for me, this movie speaks to me on a musical level, and I think that was probably why, if of all the research I've done, if you go back to the psyche of the Indian film watchers, the audience at that time in the 60s, people used to go and see Hindi movies because they'd heard a song which really they connected with, and it really, it brought joy to them, and then everything else was secondary. So whereas I wouldn't say that this film is, the best film ever made in Bollywood, or I don't like to call it Bollywood, but let's just say Hindi cinema, but the songs are so powerful that this film will have will definitely have a presence in the future, as well as in right now. Now, in terms of answering your question, sorry, could you just repeat your question, please, for me, Anuj, if you don't mind?
I was just talking about the chemistry between Joy Mukherjee and Asha Parekh.
Okay, sorry, thank you. Okay, so in my humble opinion, they're worlds apart, and but they tend to work because they are poles apart. They tend to work. They complement each other very perfectly. And Joy Mukherjee being a Bengali and not being stereotypical of this, but and Asha Parekh being Parsi, they are culturally worlds apart, and them to come together, and it seemed to work. What I will say is that the choice in my when I was watching this movie many times, what struck me was how the politics of the day came across in this movie to me. If you study Indian history, there was a chap called Subhash Chandra Bose who was in allegiance at the time of Hitler and the Nazis with Japan, and he had secretly created his own Azad Hind army, and he formed allegiances with the Japanese rulers to side with them against the British. And it was very strange to me, it's very eye-opening to me that they picked Joy Mukherjee, another Bengali person, and set the movie in Japan, when Japan is the least place you would set a Bollywood movie. If you would set it in Switzerland, you would set it in mainland Europe, you wouldn't set it in Japan. And it doesn't. When I was first watching it, I thought this is very strange. Why are they setting a movie in Japan? But then I thought about it a bit more deeper, and I thought, well, look, Bengalis generally, because of Subhash Chandra Bose, the tradition comes from there. They've been close to Japan. They picked Joy Mukherjee, who was also Bengali. They set it in, they formed a story around this with fabulous music. I mean, some of the songs, we're humming these today. Sayonara, Sayonara, Vada Nibaungi. I mean, you don't get these songs anymore. They are the creme de la creme. Lataji, and then as I said, Mujhe tum mil gaye hamdam, Sahara ho to aisa ho, jidhar dekhun wahan tum ho. Songs like this, and then O Mere Shaye Goma, Mujhe, and the other one, the Love in Tokyo, obviously. And it's strange. This is how I saw this movie. And I just think, however they made it, the fact that they set it in Japan was, in my humble opinion, probably a take on the Subhash Chandra Bose ideal, that he had formed allegiances with the Japanese against the British, and formed his own army. And many people, can I add, in India still believe that, he may still be alive. his body was never found in the plane wreckage they said he died in, and he may still be living in Japan. So that's a side issue, and that's political, and not getting into that much. But that's why I thought, well, this I can see why they picked Japan and so on. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you so much for sharing. Himanshi, sorry, I think you had raised your hand. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I mean, this is only because you spoke about Subhash Chandra Bose in Japan. It just came to my head. I actually met a lady who's based out of Hong Kong, and she's Indian. She's Marwari. So she told me there is this huge Maru population near Kyoto, and her story was fascinating. So basically, her grandfather was a part of the army, and he was based out of Burma. After the war was done with China, they were asked to leave Burma. He got on the wrong boat, and instead of going to China, I think he went to Japan, and the whole family then basically headed towards Japan post that, and that's how there's like this crazy vegetarian population of Indians in a small town near Kyoto. And it's been growing over a period of time, so much so that she went to school with a Japanese man who happened to be in the same vicinity, and they recognize each other. And he was very familiar with Indian culture because there are, this is in the 70s, so late 60s, 70s, there was like a huge population that I found out about just last year. I thought that was
Himanshi, can I just add, my cousin's sisters, their family is settled in Japan, and they're very successful, and they're very well respected. The Indian community is very well respected, especially I'm talking about the Punjabi community there, and they say, the respect we don't get in Europe, we get in Japan. So just to add,
yeah.
Very interesting there. Thank you so much, Himanshi and Bobby, for sharing that with us. And I think Gulraj also rightfully pointed out as well that the Tokyo Olympics as well were held, happened during the 1964 as well. So, Gulraj, would you like to add something to the sort of backdrop as to perhaps why it was even more set in Tokyo? Because I know you mentioned it just slightly, I think, in the beginning when I posed the question. But if you wanted to add anything else, please feel free to do so.
I don't know what the specific links are, but I think I can imagine that there's a sense that Tokyo would probably be quite cool, at that kind of moment. That it was that moment that marked, Japan's, I guess, kind of like re-entry on the kind of like world stage, following, World War II. So I wonder if also that if there is some kind of institutional kind of like tie up here in terms of tourism and all the rest of it, we're talking about it as a kind of a promotional advert for kind of Japan and Japanese culture, that in a way everybody would have seen a lot of Japan probably the year before on TV, I guess, for like the Olympics. So I wonder if there's also a tying in there with the I guess that kind of visibility of this new kind of like post-war Japan in that kind of like moment as well, perhaps.
Yeah, it's quite interesting how we've had like foreign locations as almost like a tourist attraction in Bollywood films. I mean, the first film that I think of when we say that is actually Job Harry Met Sejal, like how it also almost like promoted this sense of like us touring in Europe, going to Portugal. So I can totally resonate with that whole aspect that's being portrayed through Love in Tokyo as well. But I think, Mayuk, I wanted to come to you because I think Bobby rightfully talked about the music, and I know you have quite the musical flair. How does the music sort of resonate with you? Be it the type of lyrics or the songs itself. What do you feel about the music of the film?
Thanks, Anuj. It's an interesting question, and also a lot of interesting points came up till now, and I was quite almost provoked to comment on so many different things discussed till now. But let me stick to music. If you ask my personal opinion, I think some of the songs really clicked, some of them didn't. For example, the Manna De one, I don't know why it was there on the movie. Sorry, I'm very probably very provocative on this, but I think the rest of the songs, which were sung by Muhammad Rafi and Lata Mangeshkar ji, these are jam. And I think Himanshi ji said probably the song was made first, and then the movie was made on top of it. In fact, I'll go a bit further. I'll probably say even the tune in Love in Tokyo, that sounds like the tune was made first and the song and the lyrics were planted. It sounds to me like that. So that one, and I think rightfully 1960. I think it was released in November 1965, end of November. So I don't think I can imagine or even place myself think about what was going on at this point of time, politically, socially, or something else. A movie was made and it was a big hit. Those times it's quite difficult for me to perceive what it is, because whatever I'll say, I look from a millennial's point of view. My eyes will be very different. My thought process will be very different. But song wise, when it comes to songs, these are gems. And I think if not for anything else, probably will come to other things like the comedy quotient, the acting, etc. Compared to anything else, probably the songs stand out very, very prominently. Only one small thing, I was, as a millennial, I'm quite curious, and I know we have Google search. I was looking for, was any of these songs were inspired slash plagiarized from anywhere, and actually it is, sadly, to disappoint, probably I disappoint a lot of people, but Sayonara song was actually picked up from, I haven't kept a note of this. It's a song called "The Persian Market," in a Persian Market by A.W. Kettleby, and he's a English British composer in those days. So some of the tunes were inspired, but as Babaji mentioned, the Muhammad Rafi songs, both of them were out of this world. So I'll just stop here, because I have a bit critical point of view in different things. So yeah, I restrict myself to the song part.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Mayuk, for highlighting that and expressing that. Anand, actually, I wanted to ask your opinion. What did you make of the songs, and perhaps the actors as well? How much were you able to relate with all of that?
Are you asking me?
Yes. Hi.
Hi. This is my first time.
Welcome to
Very
you.
grateful
Welcome.
to Pushpinder for inviting me. I feel a little inadequate in front of all of you. You have seen it from lots of very different perspectives. But frankly and authentically speaking, it did trigger something from my childhood, in the sense that I was in Tanzania, East Africa, in the early 60s. I left and came to England in 65. But I think late 50s and early 60s, my father was trading with Japan. And he was importing shirts. And so that is a very big memory. And when I saw this film, I thought how advanced India was in all of these matters, and that the world was a small place even then, though we didn't realize it, and there was all this trading going on. But in terms of songs, I absolutely validate everything that has been said. They're absolutely wonderful, some of them, and I enjoyed it. But as a very lay person, just watching the film from entertainment point of view, I felt it was a little too long. I laughed. I had some laughs with Mahmood, but then I got tired of watching him. And I thought the film was a bit prolonged. And Joy Mukherjee, I used to get hits from him at some point, but he looked rather awkward in this film. And so, I think the whole political and economic aspects of it, as well as the cultural elements, were intriguing. And I will look at the film with a new point of view now.
Wonderful. Well, that's so lovely to hear that. And I think I was going to actually ask about if anyone had any fondest memories of the film of when it released. So thank you so much for actually adding that. And if anyone else has any other thoughts as well, just literally give me a hint, and I'll obviously come to you as well. But I think I wanted to talk about this Aj and Kal type of mixture, and this type of comparison of because obviously it was set in a very different era. The Hindi cinema that we see now, we're living in more woke times where obviously a lot of archaic issues are now being addressed, and we as a society are actively starting conversations about it. Without a doubt, and I think as someone rightly pointed out as well, there's a lot of archaic depictions within the film, which obviously makes us cringe a little bit now as well, and it makes us think, wow, this was society back then. So I think I wanted to come to Toiba actually, you first, about your reaction to the film in 2021, perhaps in comparison to how it may have been perceived back at the time of release in 1966.
Just to begin with, I'm totally in love with the music of the film, especially Aja Re Aja and Mujhe Tum Mil Gaye Humdam, and they are in my Spotify now. So I've been listening to them. I, from the perspective, because I kept on, thinking and comparing the dialogues or how things have been perceived. Some of the things have been stereotyped, and a few of the things are offensive or even at times sexist in the film, which might have been totally fine back then. But now when people come up and they think of films as more about being like a teacher by portraying things that should be the way they are, and people are more aware. I did find the film problematic, whether it was in terms of the dialogues when the Bengali guy comes and he has been fat shamed and color shamed, and the Bahu and Sas relationship where she's bowed down to the Sas, and all that stuff. But purely on the basis of a movie that was made in 1966, such a romantic film, if you see. Acting wise, I also strongly believe with Anar that I found Joy Mukherjee a little uncomfortable. I've seen him in Fir Wahi Dil Laya Hoon. He felt more comfortable in that film as compared to the one he is, and strangely, even if he doesn't come from our generation, I when I saw him for the first time in Fir Wahi Dil Laya Hoon, I started crushing over him, even if for his awkward acting. But saying that, I did find the film a little problematic here and there. What I noticed was something that intrigued and was a different part in the film was when the credits of the film's roll, there are these cartoons images that are put, and those images are very brilliantly put in the shots throughout the film. Every image with the script has been put throughout the film in different places. So that's something I found really intriguing from my side.
Oh, what a great description there. Thank you so much. Bilay, would you like to also give your opinion as well about this whole Arjun Kal aspect of, in terms of the stereotype that's also included in the film? Oh, you're on mute, by the way.
Oh, thanks. I feel that I've really been put on a spot here now. First of all, I wondered why I was watching the film. From a point that at that time when the film was released, or when I was young, we were not really allowed to go to the movies, because we just didn't go to the movies like that. And then the film was very long for me, and I'd been to Japan, and I wanted to see Love in Tokyo for the reason that but it did actually hit me as a film that I would watch again. For me, it was quite a quite old. There was lots of old system being played out. She was being forced to marry this guy. And the film was very fast, and it was so fast ahead of his time at that time, I thought, which was actually quite nice. There were some really nice scenes. And the film was supposed to be, I think, a domestic kind of a film, and they didn't actually go anywhere other than Tokyo. It was just set in Tokyo, I think. So for me, I think I might need to watch the film again now that I have so much more information that's been actually transcended by people, because their research point is from a very different aspect. Yeah, I just watched it because I knew I had to watch it. I wouldn't pick it up to watch that movie.
Okay, so you said you
Though
wouldn't watch it again,
I love
right?
Indian cinema and I love the old movies, and I'm quite a romantic myself.
Okay, so just to say you wouldn't watch it again, right? Is that what you said, Bilay?
I don't think so. No.
Yeah. Lovely. Yes, in fact, Deepti, I'm glad you also, and Bobby, I will come to you in a bit. Just quickly thought I'd get Deepti into the conversation. Deepti, what would you like to, if you would like to comment as well on this, it'd be wonderful to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I know, I was sort of intrigued by the Bengali Japanese link, because it instantly, like was mentioned earlier, it took me back to Bose. But then watching the story of Bose, there were many parallels. So, I have had a lot of discussions with Bengalis about Bose, but I recently, watching that film, became aware of how critical, say, Muslims were in him achieving his ends, or a female army, which is a very revolutionary concept. The Kyoto School, which is an amazing philosophical center, which without which I doubt very much he would have really been the person he was. And I the whole the whole freedom movement couldn't have happened but for also people like Satyajit Ray, who and the music and all of these things coming together. So Bose was a very critical part, but in himself, he couldn't have really, he didn't have the stability or certain aspects of standing. And many factors sort of came into play. And maybe not all of those factors always get the recognition they deserve. But I think this film, possibly, to me, my interpretation of it was that it was touching on a revolutionary concept of love for the 60s, and it's very hard for us, in our modern day to appreciate that actually, somebody falling in love with somebody who was in Japan, even, with all of our broad concepts of good and, ideologies, people are really, really awful, in the harms that they can do. So I think it wasn't done as well as maybe Satyajit Ray or others might have done it. But I think that what this film was trying to do for me is just trying to visit love as something that we need to challenge and we need to debate and we need to grow as a concept for the greater good. And so that, I still sort of, in a cheesy sort of way, it still takes me back to my childhood, the way these films were done, but probably, today, if we were to do it, we could do it a little bit better.
Yeah, I was going to say, Bobby, sorry, you had raised your hand. What did you?
Oh yeah. Sorry, I just wanted to come in. Bilay said that this film was purely shot in Tokyo. With respect, just wanted to correct that. It was shot in Tokyo, Uena, Ginza, Hiroshima, and I found it very odd that a couple of say a decade or so after the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombing, why they would go to Hiroshima and Nagasaki when it was radioactive? But they shot it in various locations in Japan, not just Tokyo. Just wanted to correct that. So that was my point. That's why I raised my hand. But saying that, another point which is raised is, don't you think that the costumes and the clothes worn in this movie are absolutely amazing? I'm one person who takes my inspiration from Bollywood, and I just think it was, both the male and the female protagonists, some of the clothes were fantastic, very rich in color and so on. And no one's talked about that so far.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, Mike, you actually also raised your hand. So did you want to say something as well?
Yeah, I think quite contextual. I wonder if Ashwin was there, he would probably ask the same question. Because the place, where it is shot, for example, in this case, it's Japan. It is actually one of those characters which plays their part along with the actors and actresses. Well, I'm not sure whether, if it was not Tokyo or even Japan, so as to say, would that even stop the flow of the movie or the story or anything else? Because other than showing some bits and bits of Japanese culture here and there, and a very weak link with, I think, Hiroshima and Nagasaki at the end. I mean, what is the relevance of Japan here, other than the fact, I think someone pointed out, because Japan was the talk of the town at the time, so probably just cash on it. Other than that, I don't know why it was even love in Tokyo. It could have been love in Dhaka or love in, I don't know, Singapore, with equal effect.
Lovely. So we have two very interesting points here. I think number one is, I think as Kulraj points out, that Lalita Pawar looks a lot more glamorous than usual in this film, which is very interesting. So Kulraj, if you wanted to talk about, and then I think Suman, I think we'll come on to you about a very interesting point you've made here. And Tanu will also come to you after Suman.
I didn't really have a point. I think it's just following on from what Bobby was saying about the kind of costumes. I was going to say that even Lalita Pawar looks very, very glamorous in this film in a way that she normally doesn't in films from the 50s and the 60s. So just agreeing with kind of Bobby there, and it's not just Asha Bharati, even Lalita Pawar looks very, very glamorous. So.
Lovely. Yeah, absolutely. And I think what Deepthi said about which was very interesting to me, actually, had obviously Satyajit Ray made the film. Obviously, two different directors, of course. So Chakravarti, of course, is a very mainstream Hindi cinema director, I think, in comparison to Satyajit Ray. So, Suman, it would be very interesting. Had Ms. Satyajit Ray directed this film, what do you think would have been different? What do you think he would have? How do you think the narrative would have changed significantly? Slightly big question, but
impossible to say, because as far as I'm aware, Satyajit Ray did not seem to make any films that were located internationally. I mean, he made his films in a very specific area and dealt with Bengali society in kind of detail, everything. He made one film in Hindi, the Shatranj Ke Khiladi film, if you remember that one. But it's impossible to say. It was just I was only making a line in the context of Dipti's analysis about all these Bengali, because the nationalism of the past kind of connecting. But I just wanted to say that in the context of Joy Mukherjee, he seems to have there was on a roll with this kind of love in films, because there was a love in Simla, love in Tokyo, and then afterwards a love in Bombay, which didn't quite work out by the sounds of it until much later. So, but I agree with what the lady Anar, when you were talking about that, which we didn't really think about in the beginning, is that there would have been definitely a lot of trade internationally, and yes, it would have been a good way of making those connections, although tourism was probably not that big in the 60s in India. People didn't seem to travel internationally in the same way as tourism grew in the 1990s and onwards in India, within India itself, and as a kind of international thing. So from my point of view, I think it's probably to do with those kind of trade promotional connections. But I want to ask something really shallow. I mean, did it start a trend for Japanese saris or Japanese silk, or was that already there? People used to buy those. My mother used to wear them, those kind of saris in those days. Anyway, it's a question.
Is that to Anar, or is it to everyone?
To anybody,
to anybody.
I think
I think it started lot of fashion in pearls. I forgot to mention that with the shirts came the pearls as well, those really beautiful Kyoto pearls from Japan. But I don't know what it was like in India because I was in East Africa at that point.
Well, that was very interesting, and thank you so much, Suman, for pointing that out, and thank you, Bobby, as well, for talking about the hairstyle as well of Asha Parekh. But I think Tanu will come to you actually. Warm welcome to you. I think is this your first time you joined us, or you've been on here before? You're on mute, by the way.
Hi, it's my first time, and I'm loving it. Absolutely, thank you very much
well,
for adding to this amazing group. I had a few things that I thought I didn't know the Japan Bengali connection, and I've just watched the movie in pure commercial terms. And I thought, because at that time, hardly anybody could travel abroad. And I think it was such a big hit. And I think having a location like Japan made it short a hit because people couldn't travel. And this was a way to see the world. I wanted to comment on the clothing. I was waiting for my turn. Because I'm really into clothing, and I thought Joy Mukherjee's wardrobe was fantastic. Couple of the cardigans that he's wearing are so contemporary right now. I mean, all these Japanese designers coming in, I thought, oh my God, that would work so well if we made it and sold it today. It would do so well. And so I really like the fashion. I was actually looking more at the clothes. For me, it was a very fast-paced movie, and there was lots happening. The other thing that really struck me was the special effects. I don't know before that if there were any special effects like that in the movies. Like, there was Asad Sain's like double role, and, there were two of them, and then the bed moving and Mahmood flying and all. I wasn't sure if I thought that was quite a forward movie technically as well. That's what my thought was. And completely enjoyed it. I just wanted to comment on the clothes, that they were really quite contemporary now. So yeah, thank you.
Absolutely, thank you so much for that. And I think it would be interesting actually about the special effects, actually, whether it was quite fresh or whether it happened before. Mike, sorry, I know you had raised your hands and then you had put it down again.
So much to say. I'll just talk about the special effects first. I mean, I was checking the credits, and the special effects are done by someone called Babu Bhai Mistry, and it's the same person who did special effects for Ramananda Sagar's Ramayan. Is the same person. So, Ramananda Sagar's Ramayan came in 80s, but that means he was in his job at least 10-15 years earlier than that. So that's number one. However, talking about that, I'm pretty sure Anuj will come to the comedy part where some parts I was thinking, what is the purpose of showing Mahmood was flying, and such a strange dramatic scene of picking up that small girl from the almost like a heroic Supermanish kind of thing. I don't know whether that was comedy or what, but anyway, I found it very funny. Funny in the sense in a not in a positive way.
In a bizarre way.
Yeah, exactly. So talking about the costumes, actually, this is probably a question rather than a comment. So I think most of the places where they showed Japanese people, particularly women, the tea house and the other place, I forgot the name. So they are all in the traditional dresses, dancing with that fan, and so I'm not sure in late 1960s or mid 1960s, was it still the norm of how Japanese women dressed, or is just a stereotyped just to make it publicly acceptable? I don't know. I think there's so much of stereotyping going on in that movie with respect to Bengalis, for example, and me being one, so I probably have to speak up. And Japanese people, I don't know really. And the best part is the directors, producers, the writers, they're all Bengali. So I don't know what was really in their mind. But yeah, these are the only two things I wanted to say at this point.
Lovely. Well, I think Nidhi will come to you first, and then Gulraj will come to you, if that's okay. So Nidhi, I think this is your first time at Filmwalas. So a huge welcome to you.
Hi,
Please, if
thank
you would like to
you.
share your views and opinions.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I'm really enjoying the discussion. There were so many great points made, so I was very eager to comment on them. But I think it's been a great discussion, so I won't repeat anything that's already been said. Just one thing that Mayuk, you just mentioned about the comedy bit. And that's something that I've always noticed in older films, that there's always a comedian and his story running parallelly with the main story. And I never understood why that was. And even in this film, I mean, there is a main story, which is actually, you know, the main focus. But then they basically, maybe this was like a storytelling technique of that era, is that you want to give drama to people, but then you kind of want to balance it out with the comedy, which is running parallelly and is very slapstick. It doesn't really go with anything, but I guess that's the kind of storytelling, which also comes back to the point that we were talking about earlier, because as millennials, we're used to one kind of storytelling, right? And for me, while I was watching it, I was honestly, I was forwarding through those points because I'm like, what's the point of this comedy, right? Like, I understand that Mahmood is obviously one of those guys that he still cracks me up. Like the first scene, the opening scene itself, I was cracking up at that, and he has great comic timing. But as a package, it obviously doesn't match with the kind of storytelling that we're used to as millennials. So that was just a point that I wanted to make, because whatever films I've seen from that era always have like a parallel comedy story going alongside the main story, which doesn't make sense.
Okay, thank you so much, Nidhi, for sharing that. So then we'll go Kulraj, Bobby, Toiba, and I think Suman, you had raised your hand as well, I think, right? So we'll go Kulraj, Bobby, Toiba, and then Suman. So Kulraj, take it away.
Yeah, I mean, just I guess links to, I think, what Donny was saying, but also what Nidhi's also just said about kind of Mahmood as well. I mean, I think with the kind of costumes, I think in addition to being kind of like providing that kind of a visual spectacle, but also that visual spectacle of kind of consumption. But I think here we also get costume as serving kind of narrative purpose as well. I mean, the whole bit when Asha Barek's disguised as a Sardar, I mean, it's like it's just fabulously funny. And I think there's that sense there that, again, maybe linking a little bit to what Nidhi's saying here, that the way that in kind of crime films, masquerade and kind of disguise can be justified in terms of the narrative, but it's very interesting how in a film like this, that those moments of disguise, that they're in a way linked to the kind of crime plot, but also linked to the kind of comedy as well. And maybe one of the things that I think that I find very striking about this film is the way that we think of like the 1970s as the kind of the masala kind of like decade, the Manmohan Desai films and all the rest of it. But this film definitely feels like a precursor to those really wild, messy, hybrid kind of like genre kind of like epics. And I think, I can't remember who said it, but somebody was saying that there's a film where there's like a lot kind of going on, and I think you can see that movement into that kind of messy hybrid genre kind of like masala style, and with the costumes being spectacle, comedy, and kind of linked to the kind of crime theme as well. I think we can see that hybridity that I think is just so central to popular Hindi cinema more kind of generally as well.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Bobby, what would you like to say? You're on mute.
Sorry. I just wanted to pick up from what Nidhi said, and having discussed it with my parents, on this topic many a times, and they were of the opinion that, in those days, yes, it was standard to have two parallel stories running side by side. And the reason for that, or one of the reasons given, was that, the common man could not identify with a postmodern India after independence. So you had obviously, the very well-established, well-off people living in their nice houses, and all, their life is very good, and they're having foreign holidays. But the common man, they needed to connect with the common man, and so I think that's where people like Mahmood came in. There was two parallel stories running. The common man could identify with that, and in fact, I was surprised when I found this out, that Mahmood actually got the Filmfare nomination for the best performance in a comic role for this film. So can you imagine, if the producer and director thought, well, this film is too avant-garde, it may not work with the masses. Let's put in a Mahmood just for insurance purposes. Just like, you know, most Hindi films during that time, 60s and 70s, used to have, as a rule, a dance sequence by Helen, because, you know, they had their own following. So I would contend that having two parallel stories was just the accepted modus operandi of Hindi films at the time to connect with the variety of people who were watching the movie. That was my point.
Absolutely. Now I know I can see Toiba and Mayuka still got their raised hands, and of course Suman as well. But I just quickly wanted to get Pushpinder's perspective, actually, because I've not gone to Pushpinder. So Pushpinder, what is your opinion on all of this? And then we'll go to Toiba, Suman, and then Mayuk. You're on mute as well, Pushpinder.
I can't do it. Okay. Yeah, I found the whole thing quite interesting. I remember watching this film long time ago, but I did pay a lot of attention to details of what Asha Parekh. I thought Asha Parekh was just amazing, what she was wearing, her jewelry, and how she was presented. It was quite amazing. Her, you know, number of earrings she was wearing was just amazing. But the film, I thought, like any other Hindi movie, had everything: the comedy, the storyline, the narrative with the crime as well as crying scenes in it. So they just pack everything in to make it one film which will satisfy all the audience. So I don't know about this political side of things about Subhash Chandra Bose and the link with Japan, although I know that he did started freedom movement there, but I don't think that actually has any connection with the film, this film narrative. But there was in 50s and 60s a lot of trade going on with Japan, because I personally knew family and friends who did a lot of business with Japan and Hong Kong. Yeah. So, but I found the film interesting, but it was long and it was of that time.
Yeah, back
Thank
to
you.
3.5 hours of duration. I don't know how we manage it now, to be very honest. Toiba, and then obviously Suman, and then Mayuk. So Toiba, would you to go?
Yeah, we briefly talked about the CGI effects. To be really very honest, thinking that it was made in 1966, I'll say the CGIs were still better, because to be maybe harsh, there are some films right now which have worse CGIs I've seen. So I'll give the guy like a thumbs up for doing his best that he could back in 1966. And apart from that, I was about the side gig part, Mahmood, I totally loved how he was put in the film, and for the fact that a side gig was comedic and not someone to elevate the protagonist in the film, which we see even in films nowadays, where the side gig or the friend of the protagonist, whether male or female, is shown either ugly or nerdy or awkward, just to elevate the protagonist, to make the other person feel better. Mahmood as a side gig had his story and was comic in a fair share, rather than what we even see, which is actually again problematic, where we show side gigs as unappealing, uninteresting. So that way, I loved how they portrayed Mahmood in the film as well.
Great. Suman?
Thank you so much. I wanted to make two quick points. The first is something that Kulraj slightly touched on, but you know what I find interesting is the cross-dressing in the film. So she's dressed up as a Sardar, and yet then there's the opportunity for them to be kind of free with each other in terms of like, he's like, I must embrace you. She's trying to, ignore him. And then there's Mahmood being the geisha girl in the thing when they're in the tea house. I kind of find that quite interesting in the sense of this idea of cross-dressing and why is it happening? Is it for comedic effect? Is it for some kind of erotic effect, or is it just like the actors are, we can do so many things, so I'm just going to like wear a dress and look better in a dress than I look in the Arab get-up? I mean, I found that quite interesting as just a point. And there is a lot of the poetry between the Joy Mukherjees and Asha Parekh when they're trying to woo each other. That poetry is quite sexual into a certain degree, and they're trying to kiss each other, or he's trying to kiss her, and it doesn't quite work. Anyway, that was one point. But just now, as you were talking, I quickly tried to look up a few other films that were released in India in 1966. And weirdly, I've come across like 4 films very quickly. Obviously, it's not a representative sample, but they were all made by Bengali directors. So Love in Tokyo, Tisri Kasam, Basu Bhattacharya, Nayak, that is the Satyajit Ray film in that year, very interesting film, and Gabban, which is based on Prem Chand's novel by Hrishikesh Mukherjee. I just found that quite interesting. Maybe that's like a separate piece of research lying there, Anyway, that's all I wanted to say. I wanted to talk about the cross-dressing a bit because I found it interesting.
Yeah, thank you for that. Actually, I quite liked it as well. Actually, I think it was quite lovely to see. It kind of reminded me of I think later on in a couple of years' time we saw a film called Rafu Chakkar, I think, where even Rishi Kapoor appeared in drag, and I love that. I love that aspect because it was you wouldn't see that quite often, and I think it was quite ahead of its time. I think Mayuk, sorry, you also had your hand up. So what did you want to say?
So on a lighter note, actually, I think Mahmood was almost at his prime in those years. I'm just talking about background music, some of the background music in the movie. And in those days, I think the music director was the background scorer by default. There was it was not a separate person. And there are 2 instances, at least I can remember. Mahmood was trying to call up someone, and they were playing a James Bond background music from the store. And the second one is more interesting, actually. They played Hum Kale Hai To Kya Hua Dil Wale Hai, which is from the movie Gumnam, which was released on the same year. It was released in 1965 itself. So Mahmood has his own charisma at that time. I think no wonder he was almost given a 50% share of the movie screen.
Yeah.
And the second point is, if people don't get offended and don't think I'm overcritic, I found one interesting point, which is 35 minutes into the movie. So I saw Asha Parekh in a fumbling scene. So if you're interested, just go to 35.35 and you'll see that she wanted to deliver a dialogue and it was not the point. And then she did it again. It's quite interesting that they didn't edit it out.
Yes, it's very interesting because as Tanu has pointed out as well, I think Mahmood was, I think, the biggest star of the time, actually the biggest star at that point as well. And Gulraj ji pointed out the bold reference as well. And I think Raj Kapoor as well, Gulraj, I'm sure you'll be able to correct me or agree, that I think he was one of the few filmmakers, I think, at that point in Indian cinema to kind of bridge this gap between international and Indian sort of cultures as he's done as well. So it was quite interesting to see how that fusion was, I guess, proceeded with Love in Tokyo. But I think we're coming towards the end of our session today. So before we wrap up, anyone wants to make any closing comments, do let me know. Someone, would you like to make a closing comment? And then Pushpinder, if you would like to as well. And then Bobby, we'll come to you.
No, I just wanted to say thank you so much for taking the trouble to spend some time watching this film and sharing the discussion around it. I feel, generally speaking, that there is a paucity of work on like Indian films. There's no scholarship. I don't know much about Pramod Chakrabarti or even Joy Mukherjee in that sense. Like, he was a big star in the 60s, but he's overshadowed by people like Raj Kapoor and Rajendra Kumar and so on, because we tend to be able to see more films of that. So anyway, I think that we do need a bit more serious scholarship in this area, and hopefully in years to come this will happen. But I think a group like this is kind of great to help focus some of my thinking about the film, if you know what I mean, because like everybody has given such interesting perspectives to it. So thank you very much.
Oh, wonderful. Pushpinder?
Well, I would like to thank everybody for taking time off to come and join us in this group, and welcome to all the new members. And we are looking forward to suggestions for next month. Any film that is online on Netflix or Amazon, or any other film, maybe 83, which is out in the cinemas at the moment, for discussion. So we look forward to your suggestions, and thank you so much for joining in.
Lovely. And I can see, Bobby, your hand is raised. So if you'd like to make any last quick
Well, what I would thank you. And what I would really like to do is, since it was Muhammad Rafi's birthday last week, a few days ago actually, I'd like to dedicate a song to him, if that's okay. Yeah. Okay. From this film. You know, I look for chances to sing. As you know, I run my Antakshari club. If anyone wants to come and join us, we have sessions every 5 o'clock every Saturday. Mayuk is already a part. Please come and join us. We have a fabulous group and we have a great time. You don't need to be a professional singer. Just, you know, even as a bathroom singer, please come along and you know and share the love. So here we go. O mere shahe khuba, o meri jaane janana, तुम मेरे पास होते हो कोई दूसरा नहीं होता, तुम मेरे पास होते हो कोई दूसरा नहीं होता, कब ख्यालों की धूप ढलती है, हर कदम पर शमा सी जलती है, मेरा साया जिधर भी जाता है, तेरी तस्वीर साथ चलती है, ओ मेरे शाहे खुबा, ओ मेरी जाने जनाना, तुम मेरे पास होते हो कोई दूसरा नहीं होता, तुम मेरे पास होते हो कोई दूसरा नहीं होता, मेरी आंखों की जुस्तजू तुम हो, इल्तिजा तुम हो, आरज़ू तुम हो, मैं किसी और को तो क्या जानूं, मेरी उल्फत की आबरू तुम हो, ओ मेरे शाहे खुबा, ओ मेरी जाने जनाना, तुम मेरे पास होते हो कोई दूसरा नहीं होता. Dedicated to the great Muhammad Rafi Saab.
Thank you very much, Bobby. That was a lovely way to conclude our session. So until then, folks, until the next meetup, sayonara, and wishing you all a very happy New Year. I was going to say happy birthday, but happy birthday to 2022, I guess. So happy New Year, everyone, and thank you so much on behalf of BFI Japan and UK Asian Film Festival. Thank you so much for joining us.
Actually, Anuj, I want to say arigato to you. Well,
yes, that's it. Yes,
Thank you so much.
Take care, guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.